Now that you've established you aren't actually a stoic philosopher trapped in a mortal coil, it's time to find out what kind of ancient Greek you really are. Do you love nothing more than getting the best grades in every single class, making the honor roll every semester, being on track to graduate summa cum laude from your college? Don't leave yet. We haven't even gotten to the best part. The best part, we're going to tell you the worst parts of living in ancient Greece, like rampant poverty, the ever-present threat of war, an infant mortality rate so high you'd think Zeus was playing a very aggressive game of real-life diaper dodgeball. Or you don't care about any of that. You just want to hear about the good old days when Greece was united under a glorious monarchy, and the entire known world was on the cusp of an unprecedented golden age of peace and prosperity. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen until 1829. Which means you're out of luck. Why don't you check out this other quiz about ancient Rome? Huh, come on. You know, you want it, which you've paid for entirely out of pocket, because your parents never went to college and couldn't help you. Do you value organization, obedience, and hard work above all else? Do you respond well to rules and regulations, even if they seem arbitrary or unfair? Congratulations, you're a Spartan. Wait, did you think we were going to say Athens? You literally described Sparta. Oh, you thought you were supposed to be in Sorry, hun, you ain't got what it takes. Go ahead and take our other quiz. We promise it'll be more fun. Are you a hoplite? You know, those dudes with the big shields and the helmets with the horsetails attached to them. You're an Athenian. Congrats. Now go sit down and write a history-defining play about a dude who murdered his father and married his mother. Oh wait, never mind, you can't do that. You don't have a tragically dysfunctional family, no? Well, then, how about you paint a vase with a handsome young man pouring some wine? Actually, scratch that. You don't have the artistic talent to pull that off. What about just wearing nice clothes and looking good? Never mind. Those silk garments and fancy perfume aren't gonna pay your taxes. And, speaking of taxes, how do you feel about paying them? Because here's the deal. If you answered yes to any of those questions, you're not Athenian enough to get out of doing anything. So, unless you want to spend the next 40 years building a wall, you better get to cheesemongering or something. Maybe you're more of a pottery painter type. No judgment. Or perhaps you're meant to be a tyrant. Now, don't click away. We know it sounds weird to modern ears, but back in the day, tyrants weren't necessarily evil. They were just dudes who seized power and held on tight. Oh, okay. Now you want to be a tyrant. Well, hey, if that's what you want, we won't stand in your way. But before you march on Athens, there are a few things you should know about life in ancient Greece. Like how the city you choose to pillage depends on whether you're Team Sparta or Team Athens. See, this is gonna be super helpful. Sparta, Athens. Right, easy. So you prefer democracy to oligarchy, freedom of speech to censorship, and warm water to baths. Yeah. I'm joined today by our returning champion, Jana, who is here to defend her title. And if that didn't clue you into what kind of day he had, I don't know what will. His father was Zeus, god of the sky, king of the Olympians, lord of the heavens, and his mom was the Titan goddess named Ione. But despite having such godly parents, fate had other plans for poor old Tantalus. The disguised Zeus was basically in contact with the other gods, and he was telling them all about it. Like, oh yeah, this guy totally bought it. He's gonna have a big old feast for me. And then the gods were like, no, thank you. Like, why are these god things? I used to serve them. And then they ate it. And then they laughed. Zeus was so enraged by Tantalus' betrayal that he tossed him up into the sky and caught him on his throne. Then Hades came along, snatched up his rear end and dragged him down to the underworld. Like a never-ending game of eternal DoorDash purgatory. And that's why you should always be nice to the gods. If you piss them off, they'll turn you into a hamburger. What would your ironic Greek punishment be? Texting your ex and getting no reply forever, or being forced to hear your own voice in every Zoom playback? Ah, you've heard of the Oracle of Delphi, the legendary seer who gave cryptic prophecies about the future. But did you know there was once a backup oracle? Her name was Femino, and she was the original rhyme-spitting. Trans-dancing Famalo still had to deal with Apollo showing up and stealing her gig. They're always trying to steal your prophecies. Like, sorry girl, but we're going with the vibes of the god of music today. This is my new vibe. And then Famalo was like, ugh, whatever. You guys and your silly music vibes. And she went back to her cave and stayed there for the rest of her days. Cave-dwelling mouthpiece of Apollo before the PR team rebranded everything. And while Prometheus was busy making humans from clay and screwing over his own adoptive father, Iapetus Famalo chose to live a little differently. instead of taking the cursed gift of fire to humanity and accidentally dooming them to an eternity of pain and suffering. She stayed out of the whole human drama and became a prophetess of Zeus. He'll pin you to the ground like a butterfly collection. You didn't get to be an oracle just because your dad was one. She was already insane, so she didn't need the special plant, and Zeus liked her so much that he sent a sacred tripod down from the heavens for her to use, which was convenient because that's exactly what she needed to deliver prophecies. And that was partly because it was extremely difficult to become an oracle in the first place. It was considered a high honor to be chosen by one of the major gods to be their mouthpieces, but it was also pretty dangerous. To be an oracle meant that you had to ingest a special type of plant that induced vomiting and insanity, and then you had to stay in a special cave while the god inhabited your body and spoke through you. Now, depending on the version, Hades either shoved him in the ground or laid down on top of him, but either way, Tantalus became stuck in the underworld, unable to escape and unable to die, because after he spent the rest of his life in the underworld, Tantalus wasn't the same again. He wasn't a cheerful man anymore. In fact, he was so miserable, he became an entirely different person. He lost his ambition, his drive, his love of life, and eventually he turned on himself and hated his own existence. And you know what they say, hate the player, hate the game, hate your own reflection, you're going insane. That's how Tantalus ended his life, hating himself for existing. Yeah, that seems about right. And they all flew away again. Then Zeus said, "Hey, you wanna play pretend, buddy?" And he pretended to ask all the questions that Tantalus had ever avoided. Why didn't you feed me better when I was a baby? Stuff like that. All the hard stuff that you usually just dodge and hope will go away. And that was the end of Tantalus, the Psycho Banquet Edition. And then they flew away. So Tantalus cooked the meal, but there was nobody there to eat it. Like classic story of college. I mean, to be fair, the man wasn't even aware he was making a bargain with the god Zeus. He thought he was just helping out some random homeless guy. But the lesson here is, maybe next time, pay attention to the obvious clues. Like if someone offers to help you and then immediately asks you to sacrifice a large animal, maybe just say, "Thanks but no thanks." And if you get ambushed by a god and he tells you to kill a ram, maybe don't do that either. And he was left there with a whole roasted lamb. Absolutely nothing to do with it. No sooner had he gotten his hooves off the ground than he was banished to earth as an infant. He decided to take his prize cut of lamb and serve it to the gods. They smelled it through Tantalus's pathetic attempt at hiding it, and they were pretty pissed, especially Zeus. I mean, I guess, relatively speaking, if we consider that he's a god, he did something crazy. He chopped Tantalus up into tiny pieces, diced him as fine as he could, mixed him into a meatloaf, and served him back to Tantalus as a supper, as if they hadn't just flown away 2 seconds earlier. For instance, some accounts say that Zeus simply took his rear end and smacked it into the ground, killing him outright. Others say that Zeus was actually pretty impressed with Tantalus' audacity and decided to show him a little mercy, tossing him into Tartarus with just the knowledge that he was destined to spend eternity there. But ultimately, even those punishments would have been preferable to what he got, which was possibly the worst punishment of all. I mean, that's what you were supposed to do when the gods showed up to your house. Apparently he was too much of a handful, even for Like imagine being such a headache to the most powerful deities in the cosmos that they literally have to send you back to raise yourself. Also joining us for the first time ever, Cleo. Until one day when Zeus showed up at his palace unannounced. And look, if the Olympians really wanted to get together, they could just do that. They're immortal, all-powerful gods. They can just pop into any place or time they want. But apparently they loved playing charades. Like, oh hey, I wonder what it'd be like to be human for a day. So Zeus would disguise himself as a shepherd, Poseidon would hit up the beach as a human dude, and Hades would crash parties in the form of a rich old man, and then whichever god was in disguise would put on some sort of test for the mortals around them, just to see how they'd fare. Zeus shows up at his door looking like an unrecognizable pauper, and to make sure Tantalus understood the disguise, Zeus threw in some extra clues. I have no fine clothes, no nice food, no oh please, I beg of you, go out and kill a ram and have a great feast. And Tantalus was like, sure thing, Gramps, coming right up. And that was a mistake. The second he agreed to the request, he sealed his fate because now he had made a divine bargain. Alright, you two are about to battle it out for the coveted spot in the next round. So let's meet our contestants. Our first contestant is a figure from Greek myth, whose name means to stretch out or to suffer. So Tantalus grew up as a mortal king of the city of Lydia, And this was what happened to Tantalus. The moment Tantalus went to work on that rat. But then Tantalus had an idea. It was bold, it was daring, it was stupid, but it was his only option. But then the gods got a whiff of that lamb, and Tantalus was understandably horrified and distressed. Now, I should mention that there were some versions of this story where Tantalus was punished more severely, according to another version of the myth, and then Zeus dropped him down to earth and put him in a deep sleep. So, Tantalus spends eternity in the underworld, thirsty and hungry, with water and fruit just out of reach. Now, I can't say that I blame Tantalus, but ultimately, Tantalus might have been better off if he had gotten zapped by lightning or smashed into the ground. You're reclining on a cushion that smells faintly of olive oil and regret. The air's thick with incense, wine, and the sound of some guy reciting tragic poetry while playing the lyre poorly. You're at a symposium part frat party, part TED Talk. A typical symposium might include dinner, which typically consisted of meats, fish, and fruits, along with conversation. How could they possibly drink without getting it all over the place? Well, it turns out that the ancient Greeks actually wore special white aprons while they reclined, so they would unspill any wine. As for the furniture, well, they used couches or special chairs that allowed you to recline. Once a group of Athenian youths got so drunk that they ran naked through the streets, only to be arrested for public indecency. And then there was the time that someone brought a goat into a symposium and tried to wrestle it. Like I said, long story, but not all symposia were wild and crazy. They believed that drinking wine made them feel closer to the gods, and they used wine as a way to loosen up and have fun. Would you get drunk and tell everyone all the embarrassing stories about your childhood? Or would you try to start a debate about whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos about ancient Greece. Of course, there were also some negative side effects to all that drinking, but the ancient Greeks were willing to put up with that. They believed that the benefits of drinking wine outweighed the risks. But let's be honest, no matter what you drink, whether it's wine, beer, or a glass of water, the real reason you go to parties is to meet new people. And that's exactly what the ancient Greeks did at their They went there to mingle, make new friends, and maybe find a new drinking buddy. After all, what's a party without friends to share it with? Some of them were actually quite civilized. For example, Xenophon wrote about a symposium that he attended where the conversation was so stimulating that he forgot to eat. And even the notoriously heavy-drinking Diogenes hosted a symposium once where the main topic of discussion was moderation. Yes. Even the most extreme people can enjoy a good philosophical discussion over a nice glass of wine. The couches, by the way, were usually made of wood and covered with animal skins. Back in the day, the ancient Greeks drank a lot of wine, and they drank it in pretty much every social setting. Wine was considered to be a gift from the gods, and it was often served at religious festivals and other special occasions. But it wasn't just the Greeks who were drinking heavily. Pretty much everyone in the ancient world drank a lot of wine, whether it was the Egyptians, the Romans, or the Mesopotamians. In fact, archaeologists have found evidence of winemaking as far back as 1800 BCE. You weren't going to end up with a neck cramp from sleeping on those babies. Well, it turns out that they didn't drink what we would consider to be wine today. Oh no. The wine that the ancient Greeks drank was very different from the stuff we drink today. It was much weaker, and it was often mixed with water. In fact, the ancient Greeks didn't even have corkscrews, so they just mixed the wine with water in a big bowl or jug. They also added other things to their wine, like honey, vinegar, or fruit juice. And if you're wondering how strong the wine was, well, it was typically around 4 to 6% alcohol, which is about half as strong as the wine we drink today. Of course, the ancient Greeks didn't know anything about alcohol content, so they just drank whatever they had. And sometimes they had some pretty potent stuff. For example, the ancient Greeks would sometimes add spices to their wine, like pepper or cinnamon. And these spices would not only make the wine taste better, but they would also make it stronger. Drinking wine in ancient Greece was like going to a spice store. You never knew what you were going to get. Then, once dinner was over, the partygoers would move to couches or reclining chairs, continue drinking, and engage in even more lively discussion. Typically, a symposium would include music, either a poet singing or a flute player serenading the crowd, or someone reading poetry. That's because a symposium wasn't just about having a good time. It was also a chance to show off your intelligence and wit. In fact, there was even a name for the type of conversation that took place at symposia. They were called sympasiastic, which literally means mixing together. These conversations were typically philosophical in nature and covered a wide range of topics from ethics and politics to religion and science. They often involved a lot of debate and discussion, but they could also be light-hearted and fun. For example, one symposium might discuss whether or not the gods were real, while another might debate the merits of Plato's theory of forms. And yet, Plato, the famous philosopher, hosted his own symposia, which is probably why they've become synonymous with philosophical discussions. Now, admittedly, these events were exclusively for men. Women were not permitted to attend, although I'm sure there were exceptions to every rule. The male participants would be both young and old, rich and poor, and they'd come from all walks of life. Poets and philosophers were common guests, as were politicians. In fact, symposia were such a commonplace that historians have found records of political deals being made there. And while the discussion was going on, someone would keep track of how much wine each person drank, because there's nothing more thrilling than carefully balancing your blood alcohol level. Please don't puke on the philosopher, the host. Some wealthy dude who thinks serving diluted wine and stale bread counts as hospitality. Poets, politicians, and that one guy who always brings up Socrates just to feel smart. You take a sip. It's watery, warm, and still somehow too strong. Someone leans in and whispers, "What do you think is the true meaning of love?" And just like that you in a 3-hour argument with a sweaty man named Echocrates, who thinks desire is a cosmic punishment. Symposia were where ancient gossip thrived. This is where scandalous rumors about city leaders got their start, where odes were sung, insults were tossed, and occasionally, someone tried to wrestle a goat indoors. And the topics, they covered it all. What makes a man virtuous? Is the soul immortal? Would Achilles have won a chariot race if he had a Spotify playlist? Modern translation. Imagine drunk philosophy night, with fewer pants and more shouting. A symposium was an ancient Greek social gathering that combined good food, raucous conversation, and alcohol. In other words, the perfect setting for a bunch of guys to wax poetic about everything from love to war to weather. Zeus would be cancelled in 2025. The idea of the symposium came to Greece via the likes of Lydia and Ionia. But it was during the 5th century BCE when Athens was really into symposia, and the word itself means bringing together, or an assembly. Think of it as a place for men to unwind after a hard day of, we don't know what exactly they did all day, but it was important. The host of this shindig would be the one providing the wine, food, and perhaps a flute player. But you may be wondering, wait a second, didn't the ancient Greeks wear those big white robes? Now let's talk about the entertainment. If you were looking to impress your fellow partygoers, though, you'd want to make sure you brought your A game. There are many famous stories about the crazy things that happened at Of course, you can't talk about ancient Greek drinking without mentioning the wine. So what exactly did the ancient Greeks drink? In general, though, the ancient Greeks drank their wine for 2 reasons: to get drunk and to socialize. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you talk about at a symposium? You survived the blood feast, the cave oracle, the wine-fueled ego battles. But here's the thing about ancient Greece, you're never safe. Ask any classicist and they'll tell you some doozies. But they aren't the only ones telling those stories. Modern myths, urban legends, conspiracy theories, and meme culture are just a few of the ways our culture keeps ancient traditions alive. And if you're anything like me, you're a fan of the modern retellings, as well as the originals. It was probably a tough gig, being the Greek historian. Born in the shadow of Herodotus and Thucydides, how did the Greeks pick up the pieces and rebuild after all that destruction? Turns out, the answer might surprise you. Welcome to Athens, the world's first modern city. Well, maybe. After the Persian Wars, Athens was left in ruins. The Acropolis was destroyed, its buildings burned to the ground, its citizens scattered and demoralized. But over the next century, Athens rose from the ashes to become the cultural and intellectual capital of Greece. And it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of hard work, planning, and money. You kinda had to bring your A game or get lost in the shuffle. So when the goddess Athena asked him to write about the origin of the Athenian people, he must have thought his luck had finally turned. After all, who could resist a good Trojan myth? But even heroes need help sometimes. And Heracles found his in the most unexpected place. The Ethiopian king. Meet Memnon, son of the sun god Helios and the king of Ethiopia. He's a bit of a mystery. We only catch glimpses of him in Homeric hymn for to Aphrodite, but in each tale, he makes a striking impression. In the hymn, he rescues the beautiful but doomed Alcestis from the underworld. In Theogony, he teams up with Heracles to bring order to the cosmos, and in the OD he plays a key role in saving Argive from destruction, and the best way to support creators like us, while getting access to original content and early looks at our episodes, plus ad-free podcast versions and other exclusive benefits, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee a month. It's a great deal. If you want to hear more about the ancient world, check out our sister channel. It's a lot of fun. If you liked this episode, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. I'll see you next time. Plus we've got some exciting new lore drops on the way. Don't miss a single one. Head over to our website to join today. Probably because it was wiped out after ignoring one tiny little divine sign. Surely they wouldn't let anything bad happen to it, right? This is the story of Thyestes, who got his comeuppance thanks to a prophecy about a goat. Wait, hold on, rewind. Thyestes was a prince who decided to play God. See, he had 2 sons, and he was afraid one of them would usurp him. So he invited the Oracle of Delphi to name the eldest, and crown him immediately. But she didn't play his game. She prophesied that the youngest son would become king instead. You can probably see where this is going. While Thyestes was at a party, his brother Pelops came to town with a team of oxen. He also had this sweet bronze chariot, which Thyestes had to have. He traded his youngest son for it. Then he sacrificed that son and served him up as a dinner to talk about a cold-hearted move, but calm as a dish best served cold. God told him to sacrifice a ram, but he ignored it. The god was pretty peeved about this, so he sent a wolf to attack Thyestes' daughter. Still no lessons learned. Thyestes killed the wolf and built a tomb for his daughter, but that's not where the goat comes in. See, after he buried her, a goat gave birth to twin boys right on top of the grave. To make matters worse, the kids weren't normal. They were both male and female at the same time. They were clearly divine, and Thyestes should have known better than to defy the gods. He killed the winged child, but spared the other. The gods cursed him and his descendants forever. When the Malians invaded, the Lorrainians begged Pan for help, but he disappeared in a huff. Their last-ditch effort was to sacrifice 2 children to the river god Alfeir, but he wasn't interested either. In fact, all he wanted was a boat ride. Guess you could say he was going to the flow, but Lernius didn't go quietly. First, they bargained with the Malians, then they tried bribing them. When that didn't work, they did something desperate. They set fire to their own homes and fled into the mountains. There they were either eaten by wolves or jumped off a cliff. At least they went out with a bang. A goat gave birth to a 2-headed kid with golden hooves and a human scream. And instead of, building a temple or consulting the oracle, the local magistrates were like, it's probably just the olives acting up. Now that you've successfully navigated the perils of ancient Greece, it's time for a well-deserved victory lap around the Aegean Sea. Hold on tight because we're diving into the lost legends, the secret histories and the shockingly silly stories that somehow survived the sands of time. It's all coming up next. Agamemnon is having an existential crisis. He's got years of whining and dining to get through first. Maybe his midlife crisis will be trading the throne for a chariot. That's actually what happens in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. After conquering Troy, even the gods are throwing their toys out of the proverbial crib. But that doesn't change the fact that Cassandra's vision of doom is still hanging over the palace like a bad smell. And now there's a chorus chanting doom as well. We only know the full story because Stasinus took the time to write it down, but the king and queen of Mycene thought it would be fun to host a party inviting everyone they kind of hated. Now they're dead and everyone's just a mess. And if you like your history served with a heaping helping of Schadenfreude, it was a rich city full of decadent pleasure seekers. And where there are pleasure seekers, there's trouble brewing. Oh boy, a goat giving birth to a 2-headed calf. Yeah, I guess that's a sign. Unfortunately for Lydia, her population seemed to think otherwise. They went ahead and held their festival anyway, even though Zeus had sent them a prophecy via goat. Maybe if he'd sent a text, they would have seen it. What's the worst part? The goat was pregnant again before the child sacrifice was even finished. There's no shortage of bizarre and brutal stories from ancient Greece. Lyrnessus was no ordinary city. It was blessed by Apollo and home to the god Pan. And if you thought that was a wild story, just wait until you hear this one. Who knew goats could cause so much destruction? But sometimes, even the gods get a little crazy. Herodotus wrote about the origins of the Persian Wars. But what about the aftermath? That's all for now. But I hope you enjoyed this special episode of Ancient History. We interrupt your regularly scheduled cynicism to bring you this message from the past. Join me every week for Mythology Explained. In other words, he became the original playwright of South Park. But the big break came when he found his calling in life. He was like the class clown who actually did all the homework. In other words, he took his teacher's advice and ran with it. Here's a story from Laertes, a Roman philosopher who lived centuries after Diogenes. He's probably best known for giving Alexander the Great a hard time, building a temple, repairing docks, and drinking a bunch of wine, and it's unclear if he ever left. Some accounts say he stayed in Athens until his death. He lived by his own rules, annoyed everyone, and died penniless. He was truly the OG of cynicism, literally where the term comes from. It means sour grapes, but in this case, it's perfect. While others say he traveled around Greece, spreading his message. But regardless, he was still causing trouble in Athens because nearly everything we know about his philosophy comes from his opponents. Plutarch described him as a filthy, lazy drunkard who insulted everyone. And to be fair, those aren't exactly words you want to be remembered by. Imagine if the only source we had for Socrates' teachings were from his arch-nemesis, the Oracle of Delphi, making snarky comments and criticizing his decisions. At one point, Alexander asked, "If I were to become immortal, how would you treat me?" And Diogenes said, "The same way I treat the other statues in the city. I'd throw peanuts at you." And Alexander was like, "Okay, yeah, fair enough." Unfortunately, that was the end of their conversation, because Alexander died before he could finish the sentence, "Where I personally take care of your eternal torment." First, he wrote about Diogenes dying. According to him, one day Diogenes walked into the central marketplace in Athens, and chose a street corner away from most people, but close enough for someone to find him. Then he laid down, held his breath, and waited. At first, people just kept walking. They either thought he was asleep or ignored him. But eventually someone noticed he hadn't moved for hours and assumed he was dead. News spread through the city like wildfire. People came from miles around to see the body of Diogenes. When they finally realized he was faking it, he sat up and said, "Is that how little you care about truth until it's dead in front of you?" So instead of a mic, it was probably a goat skull or a moldy cucumber. He left Sinope, moved to Athens, and started acting out. 1. We've already established that Diogenes loved controversy. Along came Alexander the Great, looking to check 2 items off his bucket list: kill a mythical creature and find Diogenes. Rumors spread throughout the city that the great philosopher was hiding in a jar on top of a pillar, eating nothing but figs. So naturally, Alexander shows up to investigate, but Diogenes was nowhere to be seen. Then the king leaned over the side of the jar and yelled, "Hey, Diogenes, come out, wherever you are." And Diogenes yelled back, "I'm not hiding." And Alexander was like, "Yeah, that's not how that works. But sure." Then Diogenes continued, "So you keep moving so I can catch some rays." And Alexander was like, "Oh dude, sorry, go ahead." And Diogenes was like, No, you go ahead." And Alexander was like, "Wait, then why did you pretend to hide?" And Alexander was like, "Whoa, thanks for the warm welcome. Maybe I'll stick around a few days longer and destroy your city." And Diogenes was like, "Dude, please do." So why would he wait until his death to provoke people? 2. No one knows what he died of, so we can't assume he was buried alive. Unless you're one of those people who's scared of cascades, then this is the perfect solution. Now, it's unclear if Diogenes ever admitted that he faked his death, but it doesn't matter. Everyone in Athens knew he was capable of anything. Then he started criticizing everyone, especially the rich. He called them frivolous, decadent, and ostentatious. He stole food from the marketplace and blamed it on the dogs. And when people complained, he said, "I was blaming the dogs because they are the ones who ate my dinner." And everyone was like, "Well shit, guess I'll ask the dogs." Next, he annoyed the philosophers by answering every question with another question. And Diogenes would be like, "Do you know why I ask so many questions?" Zeno would be like, why? And Diogenes would be like, "Because I hate you." Or maybe it was just an open barrel. He figured if the ancient Greeks could go all those years without showers, then so could he. But then he got taken to court for indecent exposure and public urination. But Diogenes used the opportunity to mock the entire justice system. When the judge asked him why he should not be punished, Diogenes responded, "Why? Because I am Diogenes, son of Dexophanes, a man who lives according to nature and does not trouble others." Diogenes wasn't annoying because he was homeless or poor or a hygiene fanatic. He genuinely believed society was corrupt, luxury was a trap, and that bathroom breaks were optional in public spaces. The Athenians, however, were not amused. Either way, it led to what historians call his cynic period, not to be confused with the type of person who spoils every movie ending on Facebook. This cynic philosophy was started by a guy named Antisthenes, who, according to legend, got pissed at his stuff getting stolen, so he sold everything he owned. moved into a barrel, and Diogenes was like, sign me up. Antisthenes had 4 main rules. 1. Don't have possessions, because attachments make you vulnerable. 2. Be whatever you need, bring it with you wherever you go. 3. Reject social conventions. If others want to bow to authority, go ahead, but don't force them to. And 4. Always tell the truth. Remember these throughout the episode, because they'll come back later. It smells like vinegar, cheese, and dreams that never came true. Congratulations, you're Diogenes, the man, the myth, the absolute menace of ancient Athens. We all get a little existential on the toilet, but Diogenes took it to the next level. His barrel was a rolling toilet, a mobile palace, and a weapon of passive aggression, all in one. Send in your requests to the email below and follow me on social media. Imagine spending your whole life homeless, but instead of sleeping on park benches, you sleep in a barrel. But instead of collecting spare change, you collect insult. That's kind of the vibe. Diogenes was born in Sinope, a Greek colony in modern Turkey around 412 BCE. His father moved to Athens, and that's when Diogenes started getting really peeved, which made Diogenes a distant cousin of Alexander the Great, but they were more like oil and vinegar. As a young adult, Diogenes began writing plays, satirizing prominent politicians, but there was one thing Diogenes hated even more than wasting other people's time, and that was bathing. But all that built up to one glorious moment when Diogenes decided to fake his own death. He only wrote one complete work, an epic poem about the Trojan War, but he also apparently had a soft spot for sea cults. I mean, the accounts of the sea siren were written hundreds of years after the bird siren showed up in Homer. Gorgo was widely praised for her intelligence, quick wit, and sassy comebacks. So we'll never know how Queen Gorgo truly felt about her divorce. And that's the problem with this episode and many others like it. The further we dig into the past, the more we uncover the lives of exceptional women. But as soon as we celebrate their accomplishments, we realize that their stories weren't recorded in history books for a reason. Yeah, they were smart and talented and driven, but they also got married young, stayed at home, and followed their husband's advice. In short, they led typical lives. So unless we're talking about a queen or a ruler, for example, I could tell you that Gorgo was a political powerhouse who navigated a toxic marriage and championed women's rights. I could also tell you that she was a devoted mother who prioritized her son's happiness and arranged a convenient divorce. Unfortunately, the romance was doomed from the start because Cleomenes had a type and Cyninara was not it. He immediately began cheating on her with other women. Then she snuck out of the bedroom and dumped him without a goodbye. Plutarch loved this story, so much that he included it in his essay on how women can be mean, too. But the best part is that it wasn't just Cleomenes who dumped his partner. Gorgo had her revenge, too, picking women who disliked Cleomenes and secretly encouraged them to cheat on their new husbands. Plutarch alleged that one lady-in-waiting seduced a handsome young Spartan named Nick, and when Cleomenes found out, he exiled the guy. But Gorgo didn't stop there. She teamed up with her ex-husband, Agesilaus, and her son, Archidamus, to force Cleomenes out of power. Agesilaus seized control of the military. Archidamus got the crown, and Cleomenes was demoted to high priest. Pretty sweet justice, right? The most famous story involves her son, the future Spartan king. When he was just a kid, Gorgo asked her nurse to teach him everything she knew, including how to fight. Normally, that sort of education would be reserved for boys, so you can bet the royal tutor was horrified. And when Agesilaus confidently strolled into his class, he got an earful. But the prince refused, saying he'd rather grow up to be a good warrior than a great mathematician. And that's when his mother jumped in. "I may be a woman," she said, "but I was taught by my father to be a man in all but name." All the while, Agesilaus' uncle and regent, Cleomenes, sulked in his fancy robes, unable to attend to his military duties because, he was a king consort. Like officially, the male king led the city's religious affairs, even served as high priest. Meanwhile, the queen consort was technically a priestess herself, but she was banned from participating in politics. Oh, and she also got the worst end of the royal marriage. You wanna know why? Because Spartan wives were property. After their wedding night, the bride moved in with her parents, and the groom visited whenever he wanted. Sure, they shared a bed, but their relationship was basically a series of forced hookups, which meant if the king consort wanted to move on, he could. He was free to find a new wife, kick her out, and repeat the process until his dying day. If she wanted to leave the marriage, she would have to leave Sparta. and that was unthinkable. In fact, her situation was so unique that historians have dubbed her the only female king consort in ancient Greece. And if you want to learn more about the cults and mysteries of ancient Greece, check out our episode, Was Jesus a Greek? And if they were really separate creatures, why did the descriptions match up so closely? Meet Gorgo, daughter of King Leonidas, aka the guy who kicked the Persian Empire's butt at Thermopylae. Anyway, after he died defending the pass, his widow, Queen Gorgo, took over as regent, basically running Sparta while her husband's brother Cleomenes acted as king. Together, they formed a pretty powerful duo. After all, they came to power during a turbulent time. The mighty Athenian Empire was flexing its muscles, and Sparta was preparing for war, so naturally, their queen and king consort worked side by side to maintain peace and security. Except they didn't. According to Plutarch, Gorgo and Cleomenes couldn't stand each other. In fact, they were so toxic that they fought in front of the entire royal family. Every night was filled with insults and betrayals, until finally the queen got fed up and kicked him out of bed. Cleomenes claimed he needed to focus on his health and his military duties. That's news. Plutarch also added that she was totally unbothered by the split, and, to prove it, she kept wearing her wedding ring on her right hand instead of the left. Not to mention, both versions appeared all over the Mediterranean. So instead of forcing these myths into a neat little box, maybe we should let them swim free. Maybe the bird siren was a sea siren. All I know is that I would unwant to mess with a mermaid who could breathe underwater for 7 straight days. In reality, the cults people described as siren were actually Nereid cults. There were 50 of them, each representing a different aspect of the ocean. Some looked like beautiful women, others like terrifying monsters. Some wanted to help humans, others wanted to destroy them. Plus, we're not even sure Nereus was their dad. Maybe he was just some random dude who hung out near the coast. As for the singular siren, well, things get complicated. The original siren might have been a mythological creature, a bird with a woman's face that lured sailors to their doom. But that version wasn't sea witchy. It didn't wear octopus ink or have a penchant for midnight swims. Actually, birds and sea witches aren't supposed to go together. Like, sure, you can paint your face with feathers, but can you turn a feather into a sword? No, exactly. The point is, there's nothing in the traditional siren myth that makes them a sea witch, except for the fact that they happen to show up in some of the same stories. Also, legend held that the infamous Minotaur was actually half siren, which probably explained why these beasts only ate young men. These lyrics come from a song called Minos, performed by the German band Shanmol. They specialize in medieval folk metal, and fun fact, their lead singer was in a heavy metal band called Gravedigger. Historical records call them witches, but that doesn't mean they identified that way. She was rumored to have a special talent for manipulating the winds, which meant she could brew storms with a flick of her wrist. It was also said that she sang to passing ships, lured them onto hidden rocks, and feasted on the wreckage. But her greatest feat was holding her breath. According to Pliny the Elder, she spent 7 whole days underwater, longer than any human or merman has ever managed, and yet somehow she wasn't a fish. And if that isn't proof of the supernatural, I don't know what is. Maybe it's just a coincidence that every single story about them involves magic. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, if you want to experience the cult for yourself, then all you need is a beach, a midnight ferry ride, and a thirst for octopus ink. The ferry's optional, but really, really recommended. Now seriously, if you don't have a beach nearby, how about this? Close your eyes. Imagine the sea. What do you hear? Enjoy the quiet while you can, because most coastal settlements weren't so lucky. His poem, Thibahad, features a group of women living on the northeastern coast of Greece. Again, no names, but we know their main gig was making love potions. The local king fell head over heels for one. Then he went to war, and his queen got a little too friendly with another. When the king returned, she dosed him with her own magic. He fell into a death-like sleep and the queen took over the throne. That wasn't the last time either. Almost a millennia later, the Roman poet Ovid would repeat the exact same story word for word. He would even give them a name, Circe. But both times he sourced it from a tradition that predated him, meaning there was likely a tale of siren sisters haunting the Aegean long before either of them were. It's the Nereid sisters of the moonlit wake. At least that's what historians call them. The truth is, nobody knows their real name. That much is certain because this was a cult devoted to sea spirits, half mermaid, half myth, all unsettling. They wore coral crowns, painted their skin with octopus ink, and whispered secrets to the tide. But even though the archaeological evidence is almost non-existent and the written records are spotty at best, some scholars think the Nereid sisters might have been the first documented case of actual sea witch. The earliest account comes from Stasienius, a Greek poet who lived around the 6th century BC. In fact, sailors believed these sirens haunted entire regions. On the other hand, the greatest siren of them all was said to live off the coast of southern Italy, specifically Sicily and the island of Ialia. The thing is, you can't trust everything you read, especially when it comes to sea witches. Historians tried to reconcile those inconsistencies by arguing that the bird siren was just a totally different kind of monster, but that explanation doesn't really work either. But let me ask you, what do you think? Does the idea of sea witches sound legit or just fishy? You wake up to the sound of bronze clashing on bronze, because being a woman in Sparta meant you were also a little bit warrior. But let's be honest, this is still ancient Greece, and even a great Spartan woman's life was pretty limited. The kingdom of Lydia controlled much of modern-day Turkey, and it was rich, really rich. Their king, Alawatus, ruled like a god over his people, and he wanted everyone to know it. He built giant temples and hosted lavish banquets and commissioned statues of himself and his royal ancestors. Everyone knew who was boss, but even kings get jealous. And Alat's neighbor, the king of Urartu, was green with envy. He wanted to carve a frieze of himself and his family too, and he wanted to put it in the same temple as Alat. What the F? Aladius said, and went to war. His army met the Urartians on the banks of the river Kaista, and they fought, and they fought, and they fought. The battle raged 4 days without a victor, and finally, as a compromise, they decided to end the war with an all-out pissing contest. Whoever pissed further was the winner, and the sole proprietor of the temple. And the winner was nobody, because neither side could outbe the other. The moral of this story is, don't piss against the The second moral is that you might want to work on your bladder control. And the third is that you should definitely subscribe to my channel. You could be strong and educated, sure, but you are still stuck in a patriarchal society. And even your economic opportunities were limited to managing a household or spinning some wool. Still, given the alternatives, things weren't all that bad. You could always leave Sparta and become a helot, or you could go live in Athens and be an Athenian woman. And hey, at least you weren't in Lydia. You see, unlike Athens, which relied on imported grain and luxury goods, Sparta was pretty much Their economy was based on agriculture, which meant that Spartan women were expected to pitch in and help out on the family farm. The problem was that while men were busy getting super ripped in the army, someone had to take care of the sheep, tend the crops, and gather food. Enter the Spartanagoge, an educational system designed to turn boys and girls into bona fide Spartan badass. Boys left home at age 7 to live with other kids their age and learn the ways of Sparta, which mostly consisted of being yelled at by older kids and getting into mischief. Girls stayed at home until age 10, at which point they would join a sort of pre-agoge for women. Here they learned everything they needed to know to survive as a Spartan woman, including how to spin wool and make wine, also how to run and jump and wrestle and throw things. At age 18, girls would complete their education and officially become adult Spartan women. Spartan women continued to work out for the rest of their lives. But you're Demetria, totally forgotten, because you weren't carved into any frieze or action figure line. First they practiced martial skills and endurance exercises for 5 years. Then they spent another 4 years learning strategy and tactics before taking over command of a company. If you wanted to be an elite soldier, though, you could serve for up to 30 years. So we know that Spartan women and men both participated in athletics and military training. But what about actual warfare? Unfortunately, our sources aren't clear on this point. We have very little evidence for the experiences of either male or female soldiers, but there are some clues here and there that suggest Spartan women participated directly in battle. For example, the historian Xenophon describes a Spartan woman in the early 4th century BC who killed an Amazon, while holding her shield in one hand and her baby in the other. Similarly, the Roman poet Martial tells the story of a Spartan woman who challenged a Theban man to a foot race with the prize being the freedom of her city. And Plutarch mentions that once a woman snuck into the men's gym and surprised everyone by winning at wrestling. Of course, none of these accounts are definitive proof of anything. They're just stories. But they do suggest that Spartan women were allowed, and even encouraged to use their athleticism in the heat of battle. What they don't tell you is that Spartan girls were trained just like the boys. Strength, endurance, the art of psychological warfare, and staring contests that could kill a goat. Demetria. She grew up cracking jokes at funeral pyres and sprinting barefoot across scorpion-infested fields. When Sparta fell into decline and the men marched off to lose some war they couldn't win, she did something no one expected. She joined a mercenary band in Threat. She cut off her braid, sharpened a spear, and told her mother, "If I die, it's because I was bored." For 10 years, she fought side by side with grizzled veterans, mountain bandits, and one drunk pirate named Cleon, who claimed to be allergic to helmets. She survived sieges, river ambushes, and one very bad oyster. And when she came home to Sparta, no one recognized her. Some say she became a bodyguard in Egypt. Others say she returned to the mountains and trained young girls to fight like wolves. You'll never read about her in a textbook. But her story, it's out there somewhere, waiting to be remembered. And instead of dolls or drama, your daily to-do list looks like this. Wrestle other children. Shout defiance at the sky. Eat only what you can steal. Prepare for war. Welcome to Sparta, where your childhood was basically boot camp with extra yelling. There are wars, famines, political panics, and if you're born a helot in Sparta, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a crappy life. Like seriously, if you're a slave, your life is going to suck. But let's imagine for a moment that you are a free woman living in the independent city-state of Sparta, around the year 320 BC. Now brace yourself, because everything we know about ancient Sparta makes this episode tricky, because all of our sources are written by men. And not just like any men, mind you, but Athenian men, who clearly had an axe to grind with their rivals to the north. They wrote about Sparta in epic poetry and histories and plays, which means that in addition to all the normal biases of historical writing, we also have to filter everything through the lens of propaganda. For example, we know from these sources that women in Sparta were remarkably free compared to other Greek cities. They could own property, run businesses, and even engage in politics. In fact, Spartan women were probably the most politically active in the ancient Mediterranean. Spartans took pride in having more freedom than other states, including Athens, and that extends to gender roles too. While Athenian women were expected to stay home and manage a household, Spartan women were encouraged to get strong and be active members of society. So, instead of learning domestic skills, Spartan girls would learn how to read, write, play the lyre, and, yes, gymnastics, like full-on athletics. Girls would practice wrestling, discus, throwing, javelin, throwing, long and high, jumping, and running. No one knows exactly how naked they got during gymnastics class, but they were definitely not wearing team uniforms. Not only that, but Spartan women were also expected to participate in religious festivals and rituals alongside men. Remember those staring contests I mentioned earlier? Ancient Spartans took their religion pretty seriously, and every festival involved rituals to propitiate the gods and prevent them from getting mad at Sparta. This often included animal sacrifices, and yes, some goat-killing staring contests. Okay, so Spartan women were strong, educated, and religious. Meanwhile, men went through 2 phases of compulsory military training. In general, then, Spartan women seem to have enjoyed more freedom and opportunity than women in any other Greek state. Now we head to Lemnos, an island that makes Pompeii look like a bonfire. You're a shepherd, minding your flocks. Yes. When the mountain groans, smoke spills out. The earth trembles. The air smells like eggs and doom. Most people scream and run, but not the fire whisperers. They walk toward the lava. Let's hope they chose wisely. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. This was the cult of Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge. But these weren't priests in robes. Whatever it is, it seems to have emerged from the heart of the mountain. It must know something, you realize. But when you turn to the shepherds, they're gone, and the path ahead is blocked by a wall of fire. You feel the heat on your face, smell the sulfur in your nostrils, and hear the roar of the mountain. It's coming alive, waking from its slumber, shaking off the sleep of centuries. You looked down and saw a small rock lodged in your heart. It was no accident, but no one knew that you had stumbled upon a secret cult or that you had been betrayed by one of the islanders. Your death remained a mystery, another casualty of the mountain's wrath, and they were willing to risk everything to uncover its mysteries. Their rituals were dangerous and disturbing, involving sacrifices to the mountain, hallucinogenic brews, and strange dances under the smoke. They lived in caves filled with poisonous vapors, breathed in the toxic fumes, and slept on beds of burning coals. Well, that's the million-dollar question. Or maybe the billion-dollar question, considering what Mount Vesuvius has cost humanity over the years. Until then, I bid you farewell. The fire whisperers were never caught practicing their dark arts, and their secrets died with them. But historians believe that they used a combination of science, superstition, and sheer willpower to achieve their goals. They used their knowledge of the natural world to study the volcano and predict its behavior. They used their faith in the mountain god to give them courage and focus. And they used their connection to the island's inhabitants to gather resources and support. They were driven by a need to understand the destructive power of the volcano. And they believed that by embracing its power, they could harness it for themselves. One of the fire whisperers had stabbed you, mistaking you for a spy. You collapsed at the ground, your vision fading. Thousands fled, but some stayed behind, including the fire whisperers. Who were they? Why did they stay? And did they survive? You see, the fire whisperers weren't just madmen. They were scholars in their own right. They studied the patterns of the mountains, eruptions, the tremors and the gas emissions, trying to predict when it would blow again. They believed that by understanding the rhythm of the volcano, they could harness its power to their advantage. They thought they could use the heat from the mountain to forge new weapons and tools. They could use the ash to fertilize their crops and make them grow faster. And they could use the lava to create new land and expand their territory. You had failed to escape the trap, but you weren't alone. The mountain had claimed another victim. They were smiths, mad poets, and cave-dwelling mystics who believed the mountain was Hephaestus himself. They'd hold secret rituals in sulfur caves, breathing in toxic fumes, and chanting in lost dialects. They claimed they could hear the volcano speak, not metaphorically, literally. The fire whisperers also believed that the mountain was a god, and they wanted to become his priests. They thought that by embracing the fire and brimstone, they could become one with the mountain and gain its favor. They wanted to become the fire whisperers, the only ones who could talk to the volcano and control its power. You used your wits and your courage to escape the trap. You knew the mountain would blow, and you wanted to see it happen up close. When the eruption began, you took cover behind a large rock, bracing yourself for the worst. As the mountain rumbled and shook, you closed your eyes tight, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of destruction, you heard cheers. The fire whisperers had returned. Emerging from their hiding place, you saw them dancing around a bonfire, celebrating the awakening of Hephaestus. You joined in their revelry, laughing and singing as you welcomed the god of fire back to the island. You pushed past the wall of fire and ran for the safety of the village, grabbing a water bucket along the way. You threw the water on the dry grass, creating a line of defense against the oncoming flames. As the villagers fled, you stood your ground, dousing the flames and saving your home. People cheered your name as you held your ground until the fire subsided. You weren't a hero, just a humble shepherd, but you saved your village and maybe even their lives. The villagers threw a feast in your honor, and afterwards, you returned to your flock, feeling grateful to be alive and proud of your bravery. Ever since it started groaning like a beast awakening from a long sleep, your fellow villagers are nervous. Scholars say it's overdue for a rumble. The shepherds suddenly turn pale and point at the mountain. Smoke billows out of its peak, tinged with a sickly yellow glow. You hurry after them, tripping over loose rocks and fallen branches. The closer you get, the hotter it becomes. Soon you're practically roasting. And then you see it. Someone, or something, is clambering up the mountain. Too fast for a human, too slow for a god. Is it a titan? You gasp. Are those wings? But why would a griffin climb a volcano? Surely it's made of fire. A small price to pay for living on an island forged by gods. You think, chuckling at their superstitions. You aren't religious, but you are practical. So when the mountain rumbles, you don't waste time arguing with priests. Instead, you follow the shepherds who know these hills best. They said the fire gave them visions of inventions, battles, even future disasters. They predicted one quake, 3 storms, and a rogue trident washing ashore. No one listened. Then the island cracked open and half the coast slid into the sea. Did they survive? Some say yes. Some say they moved underground and kept listening. But what if the island swallowed them whole? Would they have been smart enough to escape, or would they have perished in the flames? The sun beats down on your neck as you tend to your flock. You've been watching Mount Hephaestus for weeks now. Then the earth trembles, and the air grows hot. Panic sets in. As you watch, entranced, the figure reaches the summit and disappears into the clouds. You turn back, but there's no way around the flames. What do you do? If you chose to fight through the flames, well done. If you chose to wait, congratulations. You trusted your instincts and stayed put. As the celebration reached its peak, you felt a sharp pain in your chest. The next day, The villagers found your body near the volcano. They buried you with honors, praising you for your courage and sacrifice. Mount Vesuvius might have claimed Pompeii, but it didn't take all its victims that day. They were called the Fire Whisperers, because they claimed to be able to listen to the mountain itself. They sought the secrets of fire and brimstone. But why did they do this? Well, that's where things get really interesting. But there was more to it than that. But how did they do it? They were a secretive and elusive group, but they had a profound impact on the history of Lemnos and the world. What's your theory on the Fire Whisperers? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more explosive historical tales. This channel is now officially Cliff Notes, and starting today, we're going to be giving you full-length myth retellings every single week, complete with everything from tragic backstories to satisfying conclusions. So if you've missed the intro sequence, just know you didn't miss anything important. And this is our first ever myth retelling. I need to tell you about a special project I've been working on in my free time. For those of you who don't know, the host of this channel also creates original music and has released several albums. Amphitrite was the wife of Poseidon, though she wasn't married to him for long. See, when Teleseus caught her cheating on Poseidon with her old flame, he cursed her so that whenever she looked at the stars, she'd turn into foam. The local villagers were totally down with Teleseus's sea cult. They didn't think he was mad at all. They totally respected him. He saved the ships and the sailors, and in exchange, the king gave him whatever he wanted. Are you glad the cult ended? Or do you wish the story had ended after the part where the king apologized? Let me know. Also, big thank you to our sponsor this week, and thank you guys so much for joining me. Thanks to my artist, Josie, and thanks to our editor, Joseph. And don't forget, if you want to see us live, we'll be streaming live on Twitch all this week. Now, any reasonable person would have asked for land or gold or maybe the king's daughter as hand in marriage. But no, Teleseus continued to build his shrine. He became rich, he became powerful, but he kept doing this for 40 whole years, until one of his young followers tried to marry a wife. This apprentice of his apparently decided that he wanted to wed one of the sea deities, and so he waded into the water and yelled, "I choose you, O salty wave, to be my wife." Then he dove under the surface, intending to emerge as handsome and glorious as Poseidon himself. The sea wasn't feeling that on that day. From then on, people stopped worshipping the daughters of the foam. But every now and again, a superstitious fisherman will toss some fish bones into the sea, just in case. Everyone wanted to visit his shrine and bask in the reflected glory of his divine connection. Over time, he started charging admission to his temple. And honestly, I don't blame him. Dude was running a business. One day, however, a king named Artaxerxes arrived and demanded entry for free. The king got pissed and ordered his men to arrest the old prophet and drag him to the nearest jail. But on the way there, Talos predicted that a storm would hit that night and destroy half of Art. To prove it, he picked up a handful of sand and threw it behind him. As the grains fell, he explained that each rock monolith represented a ship that would sink that night, apologized to Teleseus, and begged him to come to the palace and save the rest of the fleet. She spent most of her days stuck in the form of a sea goddess, but sometimes when the moon was full, she'd become a beautiful woman only to revert back into foam once the sun came up. So yeah, Teleseus may not have been the best husband, but he sure was a great prophet. Well, the next album is going to be a concept album all about ancient Greek myths and monsters. So, it's kind of odd that he devotes an entire paragraph to a group of fishermen who worship a bunch of foam. The same silvery hair that we saw in the intro. According to the sea goddesses appeared to Thalos and bestowed upon him the ability to accurately predict the winds, the tides, and the dangers of the deep. He also had some other abilities, like being able to tell if your goat was cheating on you, although it's unclear how he could tell this. Maybe goats can't swim, so you'd notice that one was missing. Or maybe they all just wear little hats with the numbers of their lovers on them. Teleseus shared these gifts with the world, and in return, the people built him a temple on the coast, where he made regular offerings to the sea deities. In Strabos, telling, the prophet Thalasus lived in Miletus, just like Pliny's letter claimed, and he founded a cult dedicated to the sea. But the worshippers weren't called thalassocrates, as Pliny suggested, but Selenites after their leader. They believed that the moon's phases controlled the tides, which was true, but they didn't realize that Earth's gravity was the real culprit behind that phenomena. So the Selenites would make offerings to the moon at the beach, throwing nets filled with fish guts, wine, and salt into the water. I am planning to release this album for free online. However, The music for this project will be different from what I usually produce. Much darker, much more epic in scope. In order to make this possible, I've launched a Patreon specifically for this album project. That way, I can pay for mixing and mastering and artwork without having to worry about ad revenue or sponsorships. If you'd like to help support this project, please check out the link in the description below. And as a thank you for your support, each tier has its own exclusive perks. For example, the highest tier even lets you name a monster in the album. So if you've ever wanted to immortalize your favorite cryptid in song, anyway, I'm excited to share this project with you. I've never done anything quite like it, so stay tuned. Now, normally when I sit down to write one of these scripts, I have a fairly detailed outline ready to go. You might notice that this story follows a very similar structure to episode 7, where Thales also founded a cult dedicated to Poseidon. The reason why is that both stories are based on the exact same myth. The earliest source we have for this story comes from a letter written by the philosopher Pliny the Younger. It's addressed to a Roman senator and friend of Pliny's, recommending this guy named Thalassius as a seer. Pliny writes, because he foretells what is going to happen by throwing sand and examining the manner in which it falls. But you must not suppose that this man is despised or ridiculed by all. Indeed, the fact is, many even of the philosophers are accustomed to consult him. So Pliny claims that Thalassius made predictions by throwing sand, but he also made predictions by examining the entrails of sacrificed animals. He was good at his job too, because Pliny writes that the results were uncanny. So uncanny, in fact, that he warns his friend not to scoff at Thales' methods. But I wanted to try something different for this episode. Instead, I asked ChatGPT to outline this story for me. And then it spat out exactly this. So let's get into it. We're just really committed to this bit. Okay, you're standing on a craggy shore until one ship refused to make an offering and was found a week later, capsized, the figurehead gnawed clean off. Suddenly Thalos had followers, rituals involving salt, wine, and fish guts, tossed into the surf. The temple thrived for 40 years, till one of his apprentices tried to marry a wave, and drowned during the vows. After that, the cult dissolved, but the locals still leave fish bones at that beach. Why is it always dawn in these stories? Probably because no one had blackout curtains. The waves slap at the rocks like angry toddlers, and a lone fisherman named Thalos of Miletus hauls in his net, braided like seaweed, glistening with scales. Then, a scream sharp, high, not quite human. But before we dive into the actual meat of the episode, okay, now let's get back to the show. In the letter, Pliny mentions a temple of the deity he called Triformis, but scholars believe this is actually an epithet for him. After consulting Pliny's letter, the next major source we come across for this myth is Strabo's geography, which covers pretty much everything related to geography. Strabo goes on to explain that one day a fisherman named Thalos set off to sea and hauled in 3 braids of hair. What's funny about this version of the story is that unlike in our intro, and that's all we have time for today.